How did you start playing the game? Who recognised your talent?
Well, I received a tennis racket for Christmas in 1953, and I listened to the Davis Cup Challenge round, which was at Kooyong, Melbourne, in 1953, and that was where Lou Hode and Ken Rosewell upset Tony Trabert and Vic Satius, two 19-year-olds. And so I listened to it. It was only on the radio, no TV, and that really got me interested in wanting to play tennis.
And was there a coach who saw you early on?
Yeah, well, because I got this tennis racket, there was an old church tennis court with holes in the net and everything up behind our house. And Mum took me up and hit a few balls, and I liked it. And then so I started to go down to the local tennis club after school. And there was a lady there who was interested in helping young kids who wanted to play tennis. And she would come along each evening with a big sack of tennis balls and stand the other side of the net. And she didn't have a racket. She'd throw the balls to you because we're only beginners. And so then we would hit these shots. And so she was encouraging us. And every month, one Sunday in the month, a coach from Melbourne would come down. He'd go around this country circuit and do professional coaching. And when he saw me, I signed up for this, and when he saw me play, I think I was 9 or 10 or whatever it was, he was quite impressed, and he said to my mum and dad that I could be a chance to be a good tennis player, top tennis player, but I'd have to leave this little country town where we lived, Leongatha, of 2,000 people, because it was only a seasonal game. So you couldn't really make it if you didn't play tennis full-time year-round. So when I was 12, Mum and Dad moved us all down to Melbourne to help me try to make it as a tennis player.
Can you describe yourself as a player?
Well, being tall, 1.85 metres, which was tall in those days. Now it's only the average height for a tennis player. But so I was tall, so I had a good serve. And in those days, we only played tennis on grass and onto car, which was a form of clay court that was in Melbourne. And there was no hard court tennis at all. So tennis was an aggressive game, and playing a lot on grass, you serve volleyed all the time. So that was the style of play. So I had and I was lucky enough to have a big serve, and you'd come into the net and volley after your serve. And if your opponent stayed back at the baseline, well then on his serve, then you would hit and come in. So the points were much shorter, and the style of play was suited to quick points on these fast, low-bouncing grass courts.
Your greatest results came from doubles, but you also played a singles semi-final at the Australian Open.
Yep.
Ken Rosewell defeated you in 4 sets. What do you remember about that tournament?
Well, it was 1972, and it had some prize money. Up until then, there was very little prize money. Open tennis came in 1968-69. But the Australian Open was a very poor relation to the other Grand Slams, and not a lot of the top players came out to play in it because it was the poor prize money. Anyway, I remember they did have some reasonable prize money this time, and I was delighted to get through to the semi-finals, and I lost to Rosewell, as you said, in 4 sets, and he went on and won the tournament. But that was it was a big thrill, and playing in front of my home fans, if you like, because it was at Kooyong, where I'm still a member. I've been a member 55 years there, so it was nice to play at your home courts in front of your family and friends and play well. I could have probably even got to 5 sets, but Rosewell was such a legend that you're almost playing the name rather than the shots he was hitting. And on the day, when I think back of it, if I'd have been a little bit perhaps tougher mentally on that day, I might have been able to even get a bit closer than 4 sets.
Australia has always had great players and a great tradition in both singles and doubles. Why did Australia have so many great players, especially in your era?
Well, it was a very traditional sport, summer sport in Australia. There's lots of clubs, small clubs dotted all around the metropolitan areas. A lot of country areas had grass tennis courts. And it was a thing to do that you played tennis, particularly a lot of the great players in Australia in those days came from the country. You'd go down to the club and they would play on the weekend and you'd hang around. And as soon as the players left the court for a little while, you'd get your mate and you'd run on and hit for 10 minutes, then you'd get kicked off again when another 4 started to play. You'd hang around and play some more. So that's what you did on the weekends. There wasn't the distractions, anything like there were now. There's no screen time, no social media, no phones. And when I first started, there was no TV. So all you did was play outside. And so we produced a lot of great athletes in all sports, and tennis was particularly popular, particularly after World War II finished, and we had some players who did really well overseas. Frank Sedgman and Ken McGregor really started the trend, if you like, for all the rest of the players to follow. Sedgman won Wimbledon, I think it was 1952, and he and McGregor won a whole heap of Grand Slam doubles. They won the Davis Cup. And so when you have players doing well internationally, it's a great, a boost, an enthusiasm for young kids to take up the game. I remember when this coach came and was talking, or when we moved to Melbourne, and I had a coach there, and he said to me, son, he says, you're going pretty well. He says, if you keep this up, you might be able to play at Wimbledon one year or play Davis Cup for Australia. So the coach sowed the seeds in your mind that if you worked hard, you might be able to turn out to be a great player. And as I said, there wasn't any other distractions much after school for kids apart from playing sport. When you mentioned doubles, one of the reasons we had so many good doubles teams is because of the courts being so popular on the weekend, that there was too many people wanting to play, and you couldn't play singles. You only could have 2 on a court. Doubles, you could have 4 on a court. So a lot of the club competitions were doubles. So we learned very quickly about how you play doubles, whereas a lot of the European players who grew up learning on clay courts, which is a baseline game, they didn't really concentrate too much on their net game at all. So that's one of the reasons, we all did well in doubles. But it was that international success in the early 50s and players winning Wimbledon and Davis Cup that inspired a huge number of young players to take up the game. And then when Sedgman and McGregor turned professional, then you had players like Neil Fraser, and he came along, followed by Mel Anderson and Ashley Cooper. And of course, before them in 1962, Rod Laver won the first of his Grand Slams. And so we've now started to have success on a regular basis. We kept winning the Davis Cups because Harry Hopman was a famous Davis Cup captain, and he won a heap of Davis Cups, about 15 of them. But it was a little easier to win in those days because if you were the title holder, you didn't have to play any of the qualifying rounds. You're automatically in the final, in the challenge round for the next year. And the final, the challenge round, was played at your home country. So we would win and then wait for the rest of the tennis world to challenge, and then whoever won would come out to play us on fast grass in December. So big advantage for us, and so we kept winning all these Davis Cups. And as I said, it's just kept encouraging kids to play tennis.
On the subject of your doubles career, which doubles success are you most proud of or most fond of?
Well, I've won the Australian Open doubles twice, so that was I was very pleased with that. US national doubles once, and then I got to the final of the doubles and the mixed doubles at Wimbledon in 1975. So to get to 2 finals in the 1 year at Wimbledon and play on the centre court, I hadn't played on the centre court there, so that was a bit nerve-wracking for my partner and I. And we didn't play quite as well in the final as we had done in the matches leading up to it. But it was a great experience, and we were presented up the Royal Box with the Duchess and Duke of Kent to receive our trophies, etc., and our medallions. So that's something that I'll remember. But the biggest 2 things were to win your own national title. So to win the Australian Open doubles twice. I mean, if you win it once, somebody say, oh, that was pretty good. But if you win it twice, and we were also in the final another time, that meant that you were pretty good at doubles.
You were able to combine well with many different doubles partners. What type of player typically suited you, and what are some memories you have of the various players that you teamed up with?
Well, nearly everybody from Australia, as I said, they played a lot of doubles, they were good doubles players, so it was easy to mesh in with another fellow Australian, and a good combination was to have a left and right-hander. So I was right-handed, and I played a lot of tennis with Ray Ruffles from Sydney, who was left-handed. So that gives you a bit of an advantage, I think, to have a lefty-righty combination, because it sort of unsettles some of the opponents a bit. They see a different slice serve coming at them. And if they hit the ball wide, then it's going to go to your forehand. My forehand on the first court and my partner's forehand on the second court. So they found it hard to, you're always, that was the weapon of the players, their big forehand. So that if you were a lefty-righty combination, you always were able to use your big forehand at some stage. Of course, we had a lot of great left-handed, right-handed combinations with Newcomb and Roach were probably one of the best. But as I said, you could pretty much play with anybody. The other thing you needed to do, I was a first court player, which means I played return serve on the juice court. So you needed to play with somebody he was a backhand court player. I was forehand. So you needed someone who was a good returner off the backhand court. So you look for someone who was good off the other side where you return from also.
In 1968, tennis became open. You were 23 at full strength. How did you experience that news?
Well, look, it was fantastic. I was considered, and a few of my mates that I travelled with, we were just below the top level of the great Australian players. So we were considered just below that level of play. And Open tennis came in 1968, which meant the group of professionals that were touring around playing in pro events, they'd been banned because they were pros and tennis was an amateur game. It was decided to help make the game progress and become more popular because it was struggling a little. You had the amateur game, which were all the best players turned pro each year and left it, and the pro circuit was banned, so they weren't allowed to play at the National Association tennis courts, so they were playing in gymnasiums and anywhere they could get an arena to stage their events. So both games were struggling a little bit. So in 1968, the International Tennis Body decided that finally they should call open tennis, and there'd be prize money in the events. There'd be no expense money paid, and there'd be no guarantees for pros, big contracts to turn pro. So they put prize money in, and you got what you won. You got whatever round you reached, that was the prize money you got. And so that was an incentive for this, as I said, the second string Australians, if you like, for us to train a bit harder and stay in the game, because now it meant no guarantees, no expenses. So all the top players, they didn't get any more than you if they lost the same round in the tournament. So it gave us encouragement to work hard and train hard, and we got the rewards by earning money in these tournaments.
On the subject of singles, you managed to achieve a ranking of 38. When you played, what were the main differences between someone ranked around that level and a top 5, top 10 player? So a player like Laver, who you were able to take sets from but not matches, what did those extra special players like him have that made them so great?
Well, I think they had a great belief in their ability, that they never really doubted themselves. And when you were, say, my level, 38 I got to, and I spent a lot of my time ranked around 50 to 60 in the world, it was hard to get down to that top 20. I mean, we could play well enough on a given day to beat some of the top players, which I beat quite a lot of the top 10 ranked players, but then to back it up and go on and win the tournament, you had to have that little bit extra to do that, and these top players were able to do that week in and week out. They also had great games, a lot of natural ability, but for someone like myself, I might be able to cause a couple of upsets and have a great win, and you'd come down the other side of the mountain after you've had your big win over the top seed, and then to get back up the next day, that was routine for those players. But for me and others around my ranking, it was difficult to be able to maintain that level right throughout the tournament, and they did it week in, week out. So they're consistently able to produce that top level all the time. And a lot of them, you thought had them some days, but they didn't panic. They expected to win, really, if they were playing someone ranked 40 or 50 in the world. So if they were struggling, they didn't panic. They still just kept working on their shots, and they were very tough mentally, those guys. They didn't give it away or give you the match. You had to actually win it.
You did have singles wins over some formidable opponents, including Arthur Ashe, Roy Emerson, Stan Smith, Ilie Nastase, and Yannick Noah. Do you have one singles match that you feel is your greatest win in singles?
Well, when I beat Nastase, Ilie Nastase, when he was number one in the world in, I think it was 1972 or 73. And so that was pretty good to beat him when he was number one in the world. And I beat another player who just won the French Open, Jan Kodas from Czechoslovakia. And so I played him a couple of weeks after he'd won the French Open on clay and beat him on clay in Sweden, which was, so that's a couple of good wins. But as I was saying, for me then to follow up after beating two players who'd been French Open champion and world number one, you'd played so well and it was such a high and euphoric moment, then the next day you've got to come out and be able to play as well again to continue in the tournament. I found that a little bit hard, and if I'd have been a little bit, I don't know, a bit more self-belief, I probably would have been going on and won some more of those big matches.
You played Italy's own Adriano Panatta twice and beat him both times. In 1969 in Naples in the first round, 6-love, 6-3.
Gee, he must have been sick that day.
And the first round of the US Open in 1973, this time in 5 sets. What do you remember of those two matches?
Well, to be honest, I forgot the one in Naples in 1969. Perhaps he was a bit younger then and was just on his way up, because he was a great clay courter and that was on clay. And he went on, I'm pretty sure from memory, that he won the French. And was a terrific Davis Cup player, a very flamboyant, good-looking guy. I mean, he had the women chasing him everywhere. And the win I had over him at the US Open, he was seeded, I think, 14 or 15. And he could play well on grass, but like a lot of the European players, he hadn't grown up on it, so it wasn't his favourite surface. And he didn't like to serve volley all the time, and you've got some irregular bounces and stuff like that. So I was very pleased to beat him over the 5 sets, because it's always nice to defeat a seeded player in one of the majors.
You played in Rome 4 times. Not so much luck in the singles, but in doubles you made the final in 68 with Nicholas Kalogeropoulos, losing to Ocker and Reeson, and you also made the semi-finals with Creeley. What memories do you have of that tournament and of Rome?
Well, Rome was just a fantastic tournament. The Foro Italico was the name of the club, the stadium, and the main centre court there, it had these lovely marble statues all around it, and it was a sort of a sunken court, and you felt really important playing in there, as if you're in the Colosseum. And unless you were playing an Italian player, and that was very difficult because the crowds used to give you a bit of a hard time or try to influence the umpires. They were very vocal. So you didn't want to draw a good Italian player in Italy. And since then, they've built a bigger stadium that seats a lot more than that original centre court did, and that's called the Pietrangeli Stadium. It's named after Nicola Pietrangeli, who has been the greatest ever player. I think he won, he might have won the French 3 times, just a magician he was on the tennis court. But the doubles, the year I got to put the final with Nicky Kalogeropoulos, or he was called Nicky Kalo for short, I played with Marty Reeson in some of the tournaments. You mentioned Naples. We played at Naples and Reggio and Catania and Palermo on the Italian circuit leading up to the Italian Open. And Marty's regular partner, Tom Ocker, didn't play the circuit leading up to the Open. So I didn't have a partner in that particular time. So Nicky and I teamed up together and we got through to the final, and we really beat some good pairs, some top-seeded teams. The problem was when we got to the final, the Nicky Kalo from Greece, the Greek king was living in Rome in exile. So now when he sees Nicky Kalo and I in the final, he's going to come out and watch. So he comes out and he's sitting in the front row, and Nicky cannot play. He's so nervous that the king, I said, but it doesn't matter, he's not anymore, he's in exile. Don't worry about it. But he just got too nervous and couldn't play. And he played so well throughout the tournament. We get to the final and he couldn't play his best. But that was a great thrill, because in those days, the 3 biggest clay court tournaments in the world were the French, the Italian, and the German, and everybody wanted to do well in those three. They were ranked. In fact, the Italian was regarded as the fifth best tournament in the world after the four Grand Slams.
You during this same period, you became captain and player of a world tennis team, the Indiana Loves. Many people say that world tennis was quite a wild ride. What are some of the strongest memories you have of those times and some of the struggles to get that league up and running?
Well, it lasted about 4 or 5 years, and it cost a lot of money to get it up and running, because to get the top players to leave the circuit for 3 months in the middle of the summer, they had to miss the French Open and the Italian Open. And so it cost the league owners. These franchises were bought by wealthy businessmen in various cities, and you had an East and a West division like you do in most other pro sports in America. And the crowds were encouraged to cheer and barrack like they do in other sports. So they got a bit abusive, the home crowds, and they'd be stamping their feet up in the seats and banging seats and trying to put you off. And you're about to serve, and someone would shout out double fault and all these sort of things. So it got a bit noisy and a bit hectic, and they used to heckle some of the players. So if you won away in team tennis, it was a good win. But you had five sets of tennis each night. You had a men's singles, a ladies singles, men's doubles, ladies doubles, and you finished with a mixed doubles. And it was no ad scoring, so whoever won the next point after deuce won the game. And you added up the games that you won. And that got very exciting, because sometimes you'd get to, and it would be 22 games all. And then they played a super tie break to determine who wins the night. And the coach was able to do substitutes. So if your player you thought was playing like a dog and was losing too easily, you could take him off and put another of your team on. So there was a bit of strategy involved about whether you should make a substitution or not. And the other amazing thing about it was they wanted it to be different. So there was no lines. The courts were segmented in colours. So it lasted 4 years, and it was good fun. But it was hard to, as I said, for the owners, they didn't have a national TV contract. And that's what you need in sports in America. You need to be on TV to get the big dollars and the advertising and stuff like that. And so it was costs of putting a team onto the field, into the stadium course. We played indoors everywhere, either at basketball stadiums or ice hockey rinks. The cost of putting on the matches each year was just too high. And finally, that form of team tennis folded. Billie Jean King took over the running of it, and she kept it going for many years on a simpler basis, and still going it to this day, and it's now proving quite successful. It was very interesting, and you got a lot of players played it because they were paid reasonably good money. And I was happy to be the coach at Indiana because you got extra dough if you were the coach.
You had Vitas Gerulaitis was one of your players in Indiana. How was it having him on the team?
Well, look, he was a real character, Vitas. He didn't like Indiana at all because it was, for him, he was a New York boy, and Manhattan and Long Island and all that stuff. And so he didn't like playing in Hicksville, he thought it was, to come out to a farming community like Indiana and Indianapolis. And so he asked for a super, super huge amount of money, which they agreed to. And he thought this was pretty good. And his sister played. So he said, well, look, how about putting the sister on the team? So he got her on the team as well, and she got some money. But he was a terrific player, but he didn't have his heart in it. He was only playing it because of the money. And he actually won the Italian Open at that time, which was one of his biggest wins because he was a great player from the back of the court, really quick. I remember one particular story. We had practice at 10 o'clock each morning down at some outdoor courts at a club near where we were staying. We all had apartments. And this particular day, 10 o'clock, we're all there to practice, and Vitas isn't there. And I'm wondering why he's not there. And I get a phone call from him about 10:30 saying he can't make the practice. And I say, well, I'm a bit surprised you're late. You've only got to come 10 minutes in your car from the apartment. So I said, how come you can't make it? He says, well, I'm actually in New York. So I said, well, what are you doing there? He says, well, after our match finished 2 nights ago, he says, I flew out back to New York. He loved Studio 54, the nightclub. He was party boy, Vitas. And he says, but I missed my flight. And so I'm ringing up to tell you, sorry about that, coach, but I won't be there. So then the thought dawned on me, this is near the end of the season. I said, how many times did you do that, where you flew back to New York in between matches? He says, I don't know, maybe half a dozen. So he was a real character, Vitas, but he was a terrific player. I remember another story about him. We were given these cars by a car company in Indianapolis, not to keep, but a courtesy car that had Indy Under Loves on the door and your name. Anyway, they were Subarus, and Vitas didn't think too much of Subarus. He was a car collector, and he had Rolls Royces, and Mercedes and things like that. So he was given this Subaru, and he didn't like it. Anyway, we were going to Wimbledon, and he drove up to the airport, gave the valet parking the keys, and the guy says, yes, we'll look after it for you. And that's fine. So Vitas comes back from Wimbledon. About 4 or 5 days later, someone rings up and says, we've found this car with Vitas Gerolaitis' name in the car park. Do you know anything about it? And we said, oh, yeah, that's his car. But he just left it there.
Since playing, you've done a lot of commentary, especially in Australia. You've covered the Australian Open 43 times in a row as a broadcaster. That must be some sort of record. Could you have imagined 43 years ago what the Australian Open has become now?
Yes, look, it is amazing. This year, it's been my 44th year, and I still get just as much pleasure out of it as I did in the early days, although in the early days, you only covered the centre court. There was no coverage. It was a small coverage, and they had about 4 cameras. You had a high camera at the top of the stadium, one on the concourse, and then a couple on one of the service lineup each side of the court. And that was it. So a lot of all these great matches might have been going on the outside courts, but at that stage there was no coverage of that. And there were just 3 of us commentating, 2 hosts, and I was the special comments man. So I had to sit there and do every match. They alternated as the host, but I did 7 hours a day, every day. The other thing about it, in those days, they had the thing called 7 Summer of Tennis. So there was 6 weeks of tennis without a day off. And I commentated on every single day without a miss. I'm very proud of what we achieved there because tennis was struggling to keep the popularity and get good players to come out. It was losing participation. Not as many kids were playing. We weren't doing quite as well then overseas. And so the game was suffering. So tennis, Channel 7, who did it, took a big chance deciding to televise 7 weeks or 6 weeks of tennis in a row every day. And eventually, after a couple of years, it became popular and people would turn the TV on at 11 o'clock at home and leave it on all day. They wouldn't sit there for 7 hours. They'd come in and out and watch it. And it really helped to promote tennis again and increase its popularity. And in doing so, more sponsors then came on board and started to put in more money. So the tournament started to grow and get more prize money. And then the men and women got back together and had combined events. And that's when the Australian Open became as important as the rest of the Grand Slams. Now, of course, there's cameras on every single court and it's televised. Hundreds of millions of people a year around the world watch the Australian Open. And so I've enjoyed it. It's still great to be involved after all these years.
Well, tennis has certainly changed a lot over the years. How do you feel about the current era of players in the game today? Is the game in good hands?
Well, I think it is. The style of play is, I preferred our style of play. I mean, the game has got now so strong and powerful that it's really a power hitting game. The rackets are so light and strong. The courts, you only really play. The grass courts at Wimbledon is the only time really for grass, so that's sort of gone out of the play, so it's homogenised. If you watch tennis, you'll see the players hit these tremendous shots from the back of the court, side to side, with two-handed backhands and heavy topspin, and they hit it so hard, it's hard to find a way for a net player to get to the net because the ball is coming so fast at him at the baseline, he's struggling to get it back, or if he gets it back, he's standing behind the baseline. So the net game has gone out of it to a great degree, which I'm disappointed in, because there's nothing better than seeing a good net player come in and, pay a couple of volleys and then angle away and overhead. So you get a nice contrast. But the players, that's the style of play now, and the players playing, they're great at it. I mean, the men's game is in great shape when you've got the guys at the top, such great role models, particularly Federer and Nadal. Djokovic is a terrific player, maybe not quite as popular as the big two, but those guys have been around. Andy Murray, I mean, there's a whole lot of them at the top that have really inspired many, many kids to take up tennis. And the women's game, the depth there is really improving as well. The women are now much better coached, they're better athletes, their technique is better. And you see a lot of these good rising young stars coming up now in the women's game as well, which is terrific. I mean, the girl, 19-year-old, who just won the French, Iga Swiatek, terrific. You hardly would have heard of her. I commentated on one of her matches last year. She got to the round of 16 at the French. And I thought, gee, this girl's going to be something. Then I didn't hear from her for a while, and she didn't do that well. But she was able to then come out and produce an effort like she did this year at the French, where she didn't lose a set. And we've got Ash Barty here, who's number one in the world, who doesn't have the power of these other girls. And she is a bit like an old-style player that we like. She's got a lovely slice backhand when she needs it. She can volley. She's got a great overhead. And then you've got Naomi Osaka, the Japanese player, who grew up in America and played all the tennis there. But she's an intriguing sort of girl with plays all these wonderful shots. And she's a bit of a breath of fresh air, and she's now taking an active role off court. So the game's in good shape, really, because it's very popular everywhere around the world because of the prize money now so big. All the countries, the kids want to play tennis because there's an opportunity to really make something of yourself, which wasn't there when it was an amateur game, say, in the 60s. So it's just a tremendous change all around in tennis as far as the styles of play, the different court surfaces, the rackets, prize money, the opportunities for the top players. Serena Williams and Ash Barty and Osaka, they made about $50 million each this year. So that's a sort of phenomenal amount. So women tennis players win by far the most amount of prize money or rewarded in any of the women's sports. And I think it's in pretty good hands.
What did your career in tennis teach you about life?
Well, it taught me that there's no easy handout, to sport. If you play sport for a living, you could say, oh, it's not fair, I was unlucky to lose that match, I should have won, or I got a bad call, or whatever. There's no handouts in professional sport. It's brutal. And so it taught me a little bit of resilience to try to overcome perhaps some lows in your career when things aren't going that well. It's easy to get despondent and want to give it away. But so it teaches you perseverance and resilience, and to be able to deal with the highs and lows in sport, and the same in life. I think I've been able to keep a pretty even keel. I think with my career, once tennis finished, I was able to do TV, did some coaching. So I didn't have to do much in the business world, which is lucky because I didn't know anything about it. But also, I think when you meet so many people and travel around, you learn the ability to get on with people. I think that's very important. You have to respect all the people that you meet in life and treat them well. And then it comes back to you. And I think that's what I've been pleased about with my career. And of course, I've got a lovely wife and two great kids and the grandkids. So I think being a tennis player and having my whole life involved in tennis, I think I've been pretty lucky, and I wouldn't want to have changed it.
Well, thanks, Allan, from all your friends at Tennis Pro History.
Thanks, Dave.